Hello, my name is Reggie Chapman. I use he, him pronouns. I am the Director of Policy at the Fortune Society's David Rothenberg Center for Public Policy. Welcome to Both Sides of the Bars, which is a discussion-driven show that examines the criminal legal system from various perspectives, including people most impacted by the system. Here we discuss critical questions about how the criminal legal system works, its intersections with social justice, and the efforts that advocates are making to improve the lives of everyone affected. We ask that you, the viewers, spread the word about Both Sides of the Bars and share your comments with us on Twitter, also known as X at the Fortune SOC. Today's show is titled Artificial Intelligence, Challenges and Opportunities for People in Reentry. During this episode, we will talk about how artificial intelligence has transformed the tech landscape, which has prompted reentry service providers to prepare formerly incarcerated individuals on how to safely navigate AI, find careers in the field, and how AI presents new challenges and opportunities. We will also talk to two leaders from groundbreaking reentry digital skills programs that have adapted their curriculums and trainings in respect to AI. These two leaders are Aedan Macdonald and Javier Irizarry. Aedan is the director of Justice Through Code, which is a program that aims to end the cycle of poverty and incarceration by providing life-changing access to education, opportunities, and careers in the tech industry. Javier is the senior tech coordinator of support programs at the Institute for Justice and Opportunity. He specializes in teaching AI and digital literacy to justice-impacted communities. Javier also develops and leads AI classes, including the first ever AI class taught at a New York State prison. And so before we get started, I want to say we're honored to have both of you here on both sides of the bars to discuss this issue. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks, and so let's just dive right into it. I want to just dive right into the conversation. And I guess I'll start with Aedan. Aedan, you recently added an AI component to your Justice Through Code curriculum. And my question for you, I have two-pronged questions. Can you kind of elaborate and explain to us what is Justice Through Code, and then go on to explain to us what inspired the decision and what to add AI to the curriculum, and what does that component look like for justice impacted participants?
Yeah. First of all, thanks, Reggie, for having me. I'm excited to cover this super important topic today. So for context, Justice Through Code is a ecosystem of career accelerators for justice impacted talent to support them entering into high wage careers. Historically, we worked in software engineering. We since have branched out to have a technical and professional track. And so in our technical track, we provide training through 3 different programs, so a beginner, intermediate, and advanced program, all building towards becoming what we call an AI solutions engineer. So really software engineering, but with a specific focus on integrating AI into existing applications and also building AI tools and applications. And then a professional track, which is focused on getting people into middle wage, entry-level office roles. Both of those tracks, actually, I would say it's far more than a component for us in AI, and all of our programs have become AI native. And so the central focus of all of our training, in addition to professional development, is training people how to use AI in our professional track to accelerate their productivity in the workplace, and also to optimize workflows. And then in our technical track is really to build with AI or to build AI systems. I'm happy to cover those in more detail, but again, at a high level, that's it's really rethinking what we're training in the understanding that this is such an important tool, and also helps us really teach more effectively by integrating it into our curriculum.
Yeah, thank you. That was great. I mean, myself being a formerly incarcerated person who's went to graduate school and had to deal with the digital literacy challenge, and then simultaneously having AI being presented to me in the classroom, I can fully understand how challenged, the opportunity that it presents, and the actual privilege of being in a program that provides the services in which you provide. Thank you. Appreciate that. I guess my next question is for Javier. Again, Javier, you helped create the first AI class inside New York State Prison. And this is like groundbreaking work. And I want to commend you for that. Truly do. Again,
Thank
as
you.
a formerly incarcerated person who spent a significant amount of time in New York State Correctional Facility, I
Yeah,
know the challenges that can arise by even just having like basic technology inside a facility, let alone AI. So, like, kudos to you, sir. I guess
thank
my
you.
question is, what did you learn from that experience, and how did the students respond to the material? Specifically, you're teaching this class inside a New York State facility.
Yeah, I learned that curiosity survives incarceration. These individuals really have a passion for learning, and they also have the mindset of how they can take this knowledge and information and apply it, once they're back outside in the world, which is really key because we have people that are incarcerated for 20, 30 years, and when they return, um, the technological gap is so huge. And so I feel like AI is just a very instrumental tool in helping close that gap, because it not only has the ability to produce emails, cover letters, and all that, but it can also teach you technology. It can teach you how to navigate technology in very actionable steps in a format that anyone can understand relevant to their way of learning or their methods of learning. And so it was a great experience. Obviously there's very limited access to technology there. And so I had to bring in slides, print it out, and just run the presentation in front of the class. But they were very intrigued, very fascinated, and I saw the interest. I saw how their minds were taking this information and applying it from their perspective on how they can use it. We had people considering using AI for, helping them prepare for parole meetings or helping them prepare for searching for a job or employment opportunities, educational opportunities. There's really just no limit, and it's such a powerful technology that I feel like it should be taught everywhere.
Thank you, thank you. That's a great insight. And again, just you said two things, you have many things that I thought were very interesting, but two things you mentioned was a curiosity of the incarcerated person, and you also mentioned how you would have to the challenges, security challenges with
Right.
bringing technological devices inside the program. Yet you were able to like print it and then teach it. I want to make sure I have you correctly. As a professor, we teach a curriculum through a book, and I just want to say that like I think that is that's great, because as a person who was previous in that position, I just know the drive and the
Yeah.
curiosity and the determination of incarcerated people in that space. And if you just give them something, at least the basics of it and the theoretical framework, I think that work in itself does a lot to prepare people for when they come home. A person who doesn't really understand this phenomenon may think that, well, how are they going to learn how to use AI if they're not actually using the actual tools in that space? But there's
Right.
something to be said about like reading the actual documentation and get a fundamental understanding of the theoretical frameworks behind it. And so I just want to say, commend you for doing the work. It was something that had I still been incarcerated, I would have wanted for myself and my classmates. So
Yeah.
again, that's amazing, and kudos to you for that work.
Thank
And
you
I
so
guess I'm going to
much.
move, yeah. What are some of the biggest barriers you've seen formerly incarcerated individuals face when trying to enter the tech field, especially with the rise of AI?
Yeah. So, again, speaking to the amount of time that an individual serves inside could really affect how they approach learning about technology. And, technological phobia is a real thing. So the longer amount of time you spend away from learning technology or simply using it, you are much at a much higher disadvantage. And so the way to address that gap, I feel, is first just to respect and acknowledge the gap there, respect where they're at, and meet the individual where they're at. If we have to break down the very basics and fundamentals of using the internet, basic computer skills, just so we can get to all right, now you know how to use a browser. Now we can go to chatgpt.com. It's really just following a linear progression of what you feel will get them to using AI, and you got to start with the most basics. If they have that already, then I feel like there's really not that much of a challenge as far as presenting how to use AI. It's just work with their will to continue learning. And I noticed that students are really hungry. Like people that come out of prison, they're hungry to learn, and they love learning. They love being in those spaces. It reinvigorates them, it reignites them, and it gives them hope. And I think that one thing that AI is really great at doing is inspiring students to show them that they can really go out there and get the jobs they want. They can feel more prepared in that sense. And everyone has their own individual perspective of how they approach AI, and that's what's so great about it. It has so many use case examples. Um, but that is essentially the barrier, that technological gap, the fact that inside there's not really a lot of digital literacy, and digital literacy is reentry literacy. If you are more skilled and proficient with technology, you will be more skilled and proficient with your career pursuits or your educational pursuits. And it's just closing that gap.
Yeah, I share your sentiments. Again, like when you were saying it, I thought you was talking to me, right? I thought you were like literally like talking about Reggie's experience, because
Yeah,
one thing that you mentioned, and I want to pull on a thread that I think is very, very important for our listeners, this idea of being comfortable and of overcoming fears. I know for me, one of the
mm,
greatest challenges for this like technological skills, and even for AI when I came home, was like this fear of engaging of the material because it wasn't that intuitive. And
right.
so like when you talk about like the work you do, like sitting down with them in an intimate, closed, quiet space, allowing them to be comfortable and allowing them to engage the material without feeling like there's going to be this idea of failure. I think that was so important. Again, like in my own personal challenges, possibly the primary challenge was the fear factor, the
Mm,
fear, and then in becoming comfortable with technology. And then once I become comfortable, getting over the fact that certain things are not intuitive, right? And so I think that that's one of the greatest things you can do in that space, and you're doing it inside. I think the fact that you're doing it inside, like you're miles ahead of so many people. I really believe that. Again, talking about my own personal experience, you know, I had super duper challenges, immense challenges with that. And even when I went to graduate school and I was introduced to Chat GTP and AI, I still didn't know how to like facilitate my previous knowledge through the new technology, right? And so
right.
that in itself was a challenge. And so being that, with that said, do you notice that like like that the students in which you teach, do you see any apprehension in respect to like someone believing that they're not actually doing the work themselves because they're relying on software to do it? Have you noticed that amongst your students?
Is that basically a comment on how AI can reduce critical thinking or
Yeah,
make
yeah,
processes
yeah. Let me
easier? Yeah,
rephrase that. Good. I'm glad you clarified that. Yeah, like not so much that it can reduce, but
yeah,
that a person can believe that. And I say that because incarcerated people have been like learning through the old school approach, right? Sit
sure.
down, read, sit down, process it for days and do that. And because for myself, when I first was introduced to AI, I was kind of reluctant to use it because I thought that it would take away from my critical thinking skills. I thought that I was cheating myself. But then over time, I realized that it's just a tool. It's a tool, and if you have a decent knowledge base, then you can then use that tool to produce and expand your knowledge at a more efficient and effective rate.
Yeah, I love what you said, Reggie. Everything you just said, I teach that in all my classes, that don't look at this as the be all end all to your solutions. This is simply a tool to enhance your ability to produce, whether it's content, whether it's work, or whether you're just teaching yourself something new. So I think, the approach for using AI, I have seen students who have shared that concern. The thing is that technology is always going to be evolving, and AI is here to stay. It's not a trend. We see, Fortune 500 companies, governments, they're investing hundreds of billions of dollars into it. And we've been working on AI at least since 1956, the Dartmouth Conference with John McCarthy. And we can even trace it back before that. Humans have always had this intuitive interest in replicating processes that are similar to the human brain or human intelligence, and also just making processes easier. So when you take the entire technological history of humankind, it's always progressing forward. And essentially, you have to accept that there's no choice but to learn this technology, because if you don't, you're not going to have the competitive advantage. Others will have the competitive advantage over you. Before AI replaces humans, they say that humans that are efficient in AI are going to replace humans that don't use AI. And so I think putting that mindset of necessity there, it increases their will to learn it, and they cross those barriers. They don't stay in that place long where they feel like, I don't need this technology, or this isn't something that I can get used to. They sort of get where this is going, that learning this is essential, because everyone's going to use it at some point. It's going to be integrated heavily into our society, and you will reap the benefits if you just teach yourself it and you take your time with it.
You said something that was so fascinating, right? That this idea of like automation and replacing human beings, and you said specifically, I think you said that individuals who know AI are going to replace others who don't faster.
Right.
And the reason why that spoke to me is because I was thinking, when I thought about this issue, I'm thinking about it in the social political context, that I think that AI potentially provides an opportunity for historically disenfranchised people to kind of get in the game, because it's new, right? It's new, and it prevents people who didn't have access to the means of production and access to information to kind of somewhat level the playing field. You mentioned that Fortune 5 companies are investing in it, and that it's growing so fast that everyone needs to be involved. And with that being said, I guess I'll transition and I'll pose kind of the question, or kind of Aedan's thoughts on what I just said about this tool being a tool that can help socially disenfranchised communities and getting some skin in the game. Aedan, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, obviously a pretty complex question because there's many layers to this. I think one of the things I would say is I would agree mostly with what you're saying. I think one of the things that we think a lot about is if you look at educational outcomes for people that have individualized tutoring, or grow up in schools that have a low student to teacher ratio, right? We know that these people perform much better in school. There's a very direct link there. And to us, that's one of the great promises of AI from an educational perspective, is that if you train people how to use it on a very basic level, and also with some of the customized models out there, you really have an individualized tutor, right? So typically, if you think about working with a tutor, let's use math as an example, you do a math problem, and you get it wrong. A good tutor's not going to tell you you got it wrong and here's the right way to do it, right? They're going to walk through your process, and they're going to say, well, what could you have done differently right here, right? And what that does is that leads to better crystallization of knowledge in terms of memory, and better outcomes in terms of testing. And so from our perspective, that's one of the huge promises, is that not just in the US, but globally, the ability to have more individualized instruction for people when they're in educational settings. The other piece that I would say, which the two of you were pointing out, is I do think we're still early enough in this that many people have not started to fully adopt these technologies and implement them into their workflows, right? And if you think about um, technology adoption, like, yes, this is moving rapidly, but it takes society a long time to move on technical adoption, right? If we think about like just the internet, right? You could argue in many ways it took us 15 or 20 years for that to pervade every part of society. I think AI will be, initial indications will be that's will be faster, but it is not going to happen in a year. It's not going to happen in 2 years. We'll probably need to think in the terms of like a decade or more. And so if you're early and you build those skills, you can provide a competitive advantage within the labor market. Where that gets a little more complicated is what we don't know is how many layoffs there are going to be and what efficiencies are driven, right? There are two ways that, in a very simplistic reductionist terms, that you could look at this. One is that AI replaces many jobs, and there are fewer jobs, and society needs to step in some way to provide some type of universal basic income, or some way to provide for people that are out of jobs. The other is that this is like electricity, right? Where once every company has it, it makes everybody more efficient, and it's really utility. And so, because everybody has it, companies don't lay other people off, because then there's an advantage to the companies that don't, because they are more productive as a result. I think it'll probably fall somewhere in between the two, but I do think that impacts whether or not this really can be a great equalizer in the way that I think all of us would hope that it could be.
Well, that was amazing. I appreciate, well said. I appreciate what you stated. Well, I'm actually a glass half full guy, so I'm hoping it's of the latter, like you said, in the middle, but kind of like in the 75th percentile, I hope. Right. And I was, being that you said that, I kind of want to transition to my next question for you, which is that, considering everything you said, like, how do you see the evolving AI landscape shaping the future for specifically reentry services and tech workforce development for that demographics, since it is a demographic in which we serve?
Yeah. For reentry, I mean, I think far more personalized case management, right? So if you think of like the reentry plan that somebody puts together, prior to incarceration or afterwards, or the kind of human interactions that are so important within the reentry process, AI can essentially you can automate away or make many parts of that process, the like manual entry, much more efficient, so that you can get more time face to face, right? And so I think if you think of anybody who's like a case manager, I don't know what it would actually be, but I would say probably more than half of their time is just spent sitting in front of a computer, writing up notes, putting together plans, connecting people with different organizations. Now, if you remove 90% of that time and replace that with human interaction, we have better outcomes, and also automated interactions. Like, one of the things to a very interesting application of AI in recent years was basically to do automated follow-ups with CUNY students about financial aid, and also to send them a message that they had written themselves of why they're enrolling in college. And what they saw is that there's much higher completion rates in college, and people are much more likely to seek out the financial aid that they need, which keeps them enrolled. I think forget the exact numbers, but it exponentially increased completion rates for CUNY. And I think you could look at reentry in a similar way, right? If people have those follow-ups, they have so many other things they're doing, really increases success for them.
Yes. So essentially what you're saying is that it'll help with the reallocation of resources, so that we can spend less time, at the computer, and more face-to-face interaction with the clients, which I think we all think is probably one of the most powerful things when you think about formerly incarcerated people coming home and having the need to have that interpersonal interaction with a person who, for all intended purposes, may also be a formerly incarcerated person who can help facilitate that reentry. So I mean, I think that's a great way to look at it, to look. And I never thought about that, honestly, Aedan. So like you're like not only me, but I think all our viewers presenting an idea that people didn't really think about, since we're always thinking about this idea of like job reduction and taking away jobs. And what you just said is basically that it could actually help improve the job. So I thank you for that. That was a beautiful take. Javier, what is your take on that?
I think formerly incarcerated individuals it's going to change the game for them, in sense of when they come out. I mean, you tell me about your experience, but from the experiences I've heard, it's pretty much figuring out what's the next step. Where do I go for HRA resources, housing resources, medical resources, all the things that you feel you need to get your life back together and put the pieces back together. I feel like AI could definitely help cut certain corners where, it can give you access to resources. It can show you where resources are in your city, in your neighborhood. You can build programs for reentry based off of AI, meaning like, let's say you have an AI program that pretty much guides you on steps of where do you need to go as soon as you get out, how do you get your ID, and it can just really cut, I believe, time corners to getting there. Make them feel like, you know, they didn't lose the competitive advantage as much. And that's why I feel like the education has to start on the inside. It shouldn't start when they get out. It should start immediately. So they have an idea of what prompt engineering looks like and how they can prompt AI to their benefit. So as soon as they're out there, they can plan their course. And I think it's just, it's a game changer in the sense of it makes information a lot more digestible. And, you know, we have an education system that doesn't really speak to everyone. I don't feel it's necessarily built for everyone. It's based off of the Prussian system where it builds you to become an employee. With AI, you can explore avenues of entrepreneurship. You can explore avenues of building programs for people. I notice most incarcerated individuals jump into human services. There's this need to help others. And
Yes.
so you, yeah.
Yeah, no, and I agree wholeheartedly. I mean, I think that everything you said, like everything everyone said here today, is it's all positive for the most part. I think that, like, when you talk about education systems, when you talk about efficiency, when you talk about like creativity, and you talk about leveling the playing field for people coming home, I think AI is a win-win. And I wish we could talk about this a bunch more, but unfortunately we're up against time, gentlemen. But you know, maybe we can do this again. This has been a thought-provoking discussion, and I thank you for the information you provided. And before we end the show, I just want to say that thank the viewers for joining us for a thought-provoking discussion. On behalf of the Fortune Society, we thank you so much for tuning in to Both Sides of the Bars. If you're interested in finding out more about the Fortune Society, please check us out on the web at fortunesociety.org. That's fortunesociety.org, or on Facebook by typing the Fortune Society. This is Reggie Chapman, and I appreciate you for joining us as we critically look at both sides of the bars. Thank you.